Today on RevHangout, Ben and I talk about the previous two MotoGP races, the various races that took place in Long Beach this week, and the Australian Grand Prix. Let's do it. Hello everybody, and welcome back to RevHangout. I'm your host, Nathan Nevue, and alongside me today, thanks to the power of the internet, is my good friend and co-host, Ben Bagley. How's it going, Ben?
We have color-coded scripts now. This is great.
Yes, I have been a busy bee this week working on many things, and trying to organize everything is kind of high up there on the priority list, so glad you like it.
It'll make it a lot easier to stay on track.
Exactly. Alright, and speaking of staying on track, we have got quite a bit to get through this week because
segue.
there were quite a few races, yeah. So we'll start with MotoGP. A lot has happened in the MotoGP world in the last couple weeks. There have been two races, with the first being in Argentina and the second in the United States. The Argentine Grand Prix was pretty quiet and fairly processional for the first good chunk of it. Aleix Espargaro started on pole and was quickly overtaken by Jorge Martin. Espargaro stayed on Martin's tail for most of the race until, with about 5 laps left, Martin made a small mistake on the exit of a corner, and Espargaro was able to easily pass him on the following straight. Martin fought hard around the outside of the next corner, but Espargaro, with the inside line, was able to stay ahead and drive into the distance to win his first Grand Prix of his career. Espargaro now holds the record for the most races before a maiden win. The race may not have been the most exciting thing to watch, but the fans got to witness an awesome moment as Espargaro stopped his bike after the finish line, while he was being hit with a wave of emotion. Other riders stopped to pat him on the back and congratulate him as they rode by. It was awesome to see so much camaraderie in such a competitive sport. The top 10 finishers in Argentina were Aleix Espargaro, Jorge Martin, Alex Rins, Joan Mir, Francesco Bagnaia, Brad Binder, Maverick Vinales, Fabio Quartararo, Marco Bezzecchi, and Enea Bastianini. So this was a pretty mellow race. There wasn't a ton that went on. Like I said, it was pretty much just the beginning and the end where there was overtaking, but I think that's pretty standard for Argentina. It's kind of an odd track, so kind of generates these processional races. But it wasn't too bad, and it was cool to see Espargaro grab his first win.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I did watch a little bit. I wasn't able to catch the Argentine Grand Prix, but I was able to catch a little bit of the U.S. Grand Prix at COTA.
Yes, the U.S. Grand Prix was much better in my opinion. It was really action-packed from the beginning. Jack Miller took the early lead from Jorge Martin on lap 1. Miller then led for most of the race, and Martin fought for positions and kind of fell back through the pack. Bastianini stayed on Miller's tail for the better part of 10 laps before finally making a move for the lead down the back straight. Bastianini never lost the lead after that and won the race by several seconds. So this was a much better race. There was overtaking all over, especially in the midfield. At the front, it did change a couple times between Martin and Bastianini and Jack Miller as well. But this one was much more fun to watch. There was a lot going on for the whole thing. I think the track's better. I love COTA. I think a lot of people love COTA. It's a really hard track for motorcycles, though. So definitely
I think
challenge.
I actually like COTA better for MotoGP than I do for F1. It's really cool if you get much smaller vehicles on the same size track and you have a chance to see overtakes in a lot of positions you wouldn't see people in cars even dare to attempt. Quartararo had some especially devious looks during his race towards the inside of some corners that were just insane.
Yeah, for sure. I think COTA's one of my favorites. I played the F1 game and the MotoGP game. So I've kind of gotten to see how it drives in both. And COTA is like pretty far and away one of the most difficult tracks for MotoGP, and it's a lot of fun. You can definitely send it down, especially at the end of the big long back straight. You can send it into that one hairpin. But yeah, no, it was definitely scrappy, especially towards the end. And one of the the big stories and kind of things to follow during the race was Marc Marquez, who started in ninth, but then forgot to turn his pit limiter off when he started the race. And so he bogged down his engine super bad at the beginning and fell to the back of the grid. But he was able to slowly but surely fight back all the way through the field, up from, I think, 24th or something to all the way up to 6th place by the end of the race. And that was actually incredible to watch. I've never seen never seen a ride like that from the back of the pack that far up in a MotoGP race, because they're so short that if you fall that far behind, it's really hard to make that ground back up.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if we're ready to talk about IMSA yet, but there's something similar in IMSA was it IMSA? Yeah, I think it was. That I'd like to talk about.
Well, go for it. We are...
Okay.
Well, actually, first, let me go through the top 10 finishers for this race, and then we'll talk about IMSA a little bit. I don't have a ton on IMSA prepared, but I know you watched the race, so I'm excited to hear what you thought about it.
Yes.
All right, so the top 10 finishers for the United States Grand Prix were Enea Bastianini, Alex Rins, Jack Miller, Joan Mir, Francesco Bagnaia, Marc Marquez, Fabio Quartararo, Jorge Martin, Joan Zarco, and Maverick Vinales. So let's move on to IMSA. What did you think of the race, Ben?
Well, like you were saying with Coda and your little bit of racing simulator experience, I really like racing Long Beach and Gran Turismo, and Forza is one of my favorite tracks. So getting to watch the DPI cars and the GT3 cars is pretty neat, especially the DPI cars. We're just looking so fast. I was really liking watching the top of the field play around, especially Alex Lynn. He had a super great race and just barely edged out by Bordes. But Albuquerque had a rough shunt into a wall. He just he essentially just understeered into a wall. And he was able to make up a little bit of time. He wasn't that far off the race leader by the end of the race, but he was pretty far off once he hit that wall. So I just really liked seeing that just big old comeback. He didn't win the race, but seeing him come so close was pretty neat.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I unfortunately didn't really get to see much of the race or the highlights, but there was so much racing this weekend to keep track of. I just couldn't keep up.
It really was. Understeering into tall walls and tire walls seemed to be a major theme of the race this weekend. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I think that's just
the cars crash into a tire wall and just back out and keep going.
Yeah, that just seems to be a theme with Long Beach, because there was a lot of that in IndyCar as well.
Yeah, and if you look at the results, you notice that Cadillac was able to place 1, 2, and 3 for production for DPI, which continues their trend since, pretty sure I heard it was 2014 was the last time a Cadillac didn't place first in the Long Beach race. So they've got a pretty impressive winning streak going.
That is very impressive. That's what, 8 years? 9 years now?
I'm not very good at math.
Well, regardless, that's pretty impressive. I know Cadillac's been doing really well in the DPI class this year. So looks like they're starting to pull a little bit of a lead out.
Yeah, and I always forget just how good the IMSA cars sound versus F1. They're just throaty, which is pretty neat. But we can get back to IndyCar. Kind of get back on track.
Yeah, we can move on to IndyCar. IndyCar made a return to the streets of Long Beach as well this week. This track's super tight and challenging for drivers. There's a lot of bumps, off-camber turns, slow, tight, low-grip corners. It's always a fun spectacle at Long Beach, and this week was no different. Many top drivers struggled through the narrow circuit in qualifying, and Scott Dixon was even eliminated before the second round. And in the end, Colton Herta walked away with pole position with Newgarden and Palou in tow. As the green flags flew at the Long Beach circuit, Colton Herta took an early lead of the race. He seemed to be pacing Palou and Newgarden behind and maintaining a comfortable margin. About 15 laps into the race, Palou dove into the pits for an early pit stop. Herta and Newgarden continued on for 2 and 3 laps respectively and then pitted. Herta was shocked when he watched Newgarden and Palou drive right past him on pit exit. They managed to make their pit stops work better and jumped him. Marcus Ericsson clawed his way through the midfield along with fellow former F1 driver Roman Grosjean up to P4 and P5. For the second round of pit stops, Herta didn't want to get undercut again, so he pushed as hard as he could on his in-lap. He pushed too hard, which amounted to him hitting the wall and destroying his car. Ericsson pitted but pushed too hard on his outlap, resulting in him oversteering into the wall and nearly taking several other cars out with him. This gave Grosjean an opening to fight with the leaders. Grosjean passed Palou into turn 1 and a spectacular run around the outside with less than 10 laps to go. Racing continued as Grosjean put pressure on Newgarden. Unfortunately for Grosjean, a late full cars caution sealed the victory for Newgarden. This was a crazy race. There was constant overtaking, constant battling all throughout the field. And there were some of the drivers really fought back from having pretty poor qualifying performances to being right up there contending for, the win. A big example was Pato O'Ward. Had a really good race. He started down, I think, in P9 or 10, ended up 5th. And then Scott Dixon, I think, started P12 or 13 and ended 6th. And then Grosjean with the podium. I know he started in the top 10, but he was kind of low. I think he started 6th, but really cool to see Grosjean on the podium. I love that he's doing well in IndyCar and enjoying it still.
For sure, yeah. And Long Beach is just a really tight circuit. There's not a whole... It's kind of like Monaco, and there's not a whole lot of... You have to be really gutsy with your passes at Long Beach.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, there's not a lot of room, and so you really have to be assertive and stick your nose in and let the other driver know that you're not backing out.
Yep.
There were a couple of really, really good overtakes into turn 1 between Grosjean and Palou, and then there was a really crazy one between Alexander Rossi and why can't I think of his name? Felix Rosenqvist. So, yeah, there were some good overtaking, and it was too bad to see Herta into the wall. He was having a really good race, but he tried so hard to win. I think he just kind of overdid it on his in lap there.
Yeah, the track will punish you if you go too hard in a corner, and it was the same thing with IMSA, where a lot of drivers just oversteer, understeer out of a corner just because they try to take it a bit too hard, and there's not a whole lot of margin for washing out on a corner.
Yeah, it's a really tough track. Like I said, there's bumps everywhere. Turn 5 is really off camber, so if you hit the curb on the inside of the turn at the wrong angle, you're gonna spin off into the wall, and there were a lot of instances of that happening. Grosjean crashed really bad in qualifying doing that, and there were 3 or 4 crashes in the race at that one turn. So, pretty treacherous track. But we'll move on to the top 10 finishers of the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. So, in first place, winning the race, was Joseph Newgarden, followed by Roman Grosjean, Alex Palou, Will Power, Pato O'Ward, Scott Dixon, Graham Rahal, Alexander Rossi, Helio Castroneves, and Kyle Kirkwood. Alright, that pretty much wraps it up for IndyCar, so let's move on to everybody's favorite series, Formula One. The Formula One caravan made its way down under this week for the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. This is a fan-favorite track as it has been the season opening race for many years. The Albert Park circuit has undergone some changes since the last time we raced here in 2019. Some of the low-speed corners have been widened and made shallower to increase the speed drivers can take them. One of the chicanes that was used to break up the back straight has now been completely removed, allowing what was once a heavy braking zone with 4 downshifts to now be taken flat out. This has dramatically reduced the lap time, and the pole position qualifying time was nearly 3 seconds lower than it was in 2019. That's pretty insane because the cars in 2019 were faster than the current cars.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, they changed. I think they changed 3 or 4 of the corners, but they pretty much just did the same thing to all of them, which was make them faster.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite the adjustment, and it seemed like it really made a big difference on how the track played out. It seemed like it was way more of a challenge for a lot of people with the increased speeds going into the braking zones. There were a lot of lockups. There were a lot of people going off into the grass. It was pretty crazy to watch.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think taking more curves out of a track to make it faster makes it more interesting or less interesting? I wonder.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it really depends on so much, but the Australian this race was fun to watch, but I think the only reason that it was entertaining was because of how many safety cars there were. Um, Whereas once things got spread out, I'd say 10 to 15 laps after the safety car, it became pretty much a bunch of DRS trains going around. And
Yeah,
no one could really pass very easily. So I would say I would prefer that the track doesn't rely on safety cars to make racing interesting.
fair
But
enough.
I don't know, something can be adjusted maybe. They started this week saying that that track was going to have 4 DRS zones, which would have been the most of any we've ever seen. Um, there were supposed to be four unique DRS zones on this track, and they decided before I think P3 free practice 3 or maybe it was qualifying that they were going to remove one of the DRS zones because the speeds that they were entering a very tight corner at was actually ridiculous.
Yeah, and
So
after watching the race, I think that was probably the best idea they had for the weekend.
I would say so too, because at the end of what was that DRS zone, there were still like 2 or 3 people going off at that corner, even without the DRS in the race. So I think it was probably the right decision.
Yeah, so circling back to those free practice sessions, were there any notable events that you noticed?
A lot of cars had problems throughout all of practice, um, and there were, I mean, Latifi and both Aston Martins just had constant problems. Vettel in particular had a terrible weekend.
But
He
man, did
his
we get
car.
some we got some good video footage out of that.
Yes, we did get some video footage. We got some memes to add to the fresh 2022 F1 meme pile. Lots of scooters being used, and what do you think about the fine that Sebastian Vettel got? He got a 5,000 euro fine for riding the scooter on the track back to the pit lane.
I honestly thought it'd be worse. If I was Sebastian Vettel and all it cost to take a scooter ride on the Australian Grand Prix track was £5,000, I would pay that.
Yeah, yeah, it was a kind of a nothing penalty for him considering how much money they make, but I just found it a little bit odd. The whole situation was weird.
Yeah,
But back to the performance, Aston Martin especially had just an atrocious weekend. Their cars had problems from left to right. Sebastian Vettel had an engine failure in one of the practice sessions and then crashed in the other two, I believe. Or he crashed out completely in one of them, and then I think he just had a couple of incidents in the other one.
yep.
But Lance
And
Stroll
then
also had incidents.
yeah, Lance Stroll was also an Aston Martin driver that managed to rack up a little bit more severe penalty during one of the practice sessions.
Yeah, that was a Q1 actually.
Q1, right?
Yeah. So it's a good moment to move on to qualifying. In Q1, Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi crashed into each other while they were on slow laps. Latifi's car was absolutely demolished as Stroll tore off his front suspension, sending him into the wall in a high-speed spin. Stroll's car was much better off, but he needed a new front suspension before the race. This ended qualifying for both drivers, and they both started near the back. So yeah, that's where Stroll got his penalty. I honestly thought it was Latifi's fault, so I was kind of confused. I thought it was a pretty, like, when I say it was Latifi's fault, I would say it was very close to not being anybody's fault, but I think it was Latifi that caused the accident, so I was kind of confused when they gave Stroll the penalty.
I can see from a couple angles it's kind of hard to tell, but from one specifically, you could definitely see Stroll start to cheat towards that inside braking line, and obviously it doesn't look like he did it super maliciously, but a quick mirror check which you saw some of the Fernando Alonso helmet cam footage, how often he checks his mirrors. Even just checking his mirrors half as much as Alonso did during that little stretch of helmet cam footage. He easily would have seen Latifi coming up and either been able to avoid it or done something to, avoid having that happen. But Lance Stroll's looking, I don't want to say aggressive, but he definitely had his elbows out a bit more than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I would agree. I think he might feel pressured to push more since they're not in a great car. So decent results are going to be way harder to come by. But that's really it. It is interesting. Lance Stroll has been on his defenses, especially during the race. It was there were some sketchy moments. But we'll keep talking about qualifying here. As qualifying resumed, Alex Albon slowed dramatically after his lap and eventually came to a halt on the side of the track. It was later announced that he had been disqualified from qualifying because his car was unable to provide a 1-liter fuel sample. It seems as though Albon simply ran out of fuel after his run, which was very odd and doesn't happen too often in F1. Albon started from 19th place as Stroll did not qualify. Stroll was also handed that 3-place grid penalty. So, yeah, that was a kind of a Seb and Hungary last year moment, where car was out of fuel and couldn't provide enough fuel to make sure it wasn't cheating. So they disqualified him.
Yeah, that's still super interesting to me. All the regulations and rules surrounding that, especially after watching IMSA and IndyCar, where refueling's pretty normal. They don't really have to worry about checking to make sure they have at least 1 liter of fuel at the end of the race. Or at least if they do, I have never seen it be a problem because they fuel up pretty often.
Right, that's one of the big differences between F1 and a lot of other sports is the refueling. There's no refueling allowed in F1 because of some unsafe things that have happened in the past. But that hasn't stopped pretty much every other major series from keeping the refueling in place. A lot of them have some safety rules in place that have made refueling a much safer process than it used to be. But IndyCar, for example, has not moved over to that system, and I think they would need to modify their engines because their engines aren't built to run for that long on one tank of fuel.
Yeah, it'd make the cars a lot heavier too, and they would change weight so dramatically over the course of their laps, especially since, they're going for example, the Indy 500, they're going for 500 laps, or...
it's 200 laps.
200, dang it, I knew it. 200 laps, that's embarrassing. But, yeah, that's a lot of fuel to have to carry on board compared to F1, so... I don't know. I always think it's interesting when drivers get penalized for fuel consumption and not having enough to provide fuel samples after the race, but just another difference.
Yep, but the rules are the rules. So, yeah, it kind of sucked for Albon, but as we'll learn later, it didn't end up all bad. Alright, so we'll move on to Q3, which was pretty hard fought between Leclerc and the Red Bull drivers. Verstappen put up a solid time on his first run, but that was quickly bested by Sergio Perez, who beat Max's time by 1/1000th of a second. This gave the Red Bull driver duo an advantage as the end of the session approached. Leclerc put in a massive lap, gaining a 3/10 advantage on the Red Bulls, and then Perez came back out to give it another shot. His second lap brought him so close to Leclerc as he crossed the line 1/1000th of a second down on his time. Verstappen went out for a final lap along with Leclerc. Ultimately, Verstappen improved on Leclerc's second lap, but was once again bested by almost 3/10 of a second as Leclerc crossed the line with a 1:17.868 for pole position. So Q3 was pretty fun to watch. It went back and forth the entire time. Like, at the beginning you thought Perez was going to be on pole by 1/1000th, and then all of a sudden the Ferrari comes out of nowhere and puts up 3/10.
Yeah, it almost felt like Ferrari was just kind of waiting for Red Bull to set a target time, and then they could just tell Leclerc to go out and beat it, and he would.
Yeah, that kind of sums up the weekend. Actually, Leclerc was absolutely dominant for the whole thing. The Ferrari just looked so fast
Yeah,
in
did
Australia.
their cars get faster?
I don't know, but they look like they've taken a step past Red Bull. But that could just be the track too, because it's a very high power track now. So it's not going to be Red Bull's forte really.
It could be, yeah.
Uh, Whereas Ferrari, I think, has the better engines. They had the advantage, but Red Bull still looks fast. So I think at the right track, they can still win. But let's talk about the race because that's where a lot of the the main talking points come out of.
Yeah.
So we'll start. We're gonna try and go a little more in order this time. I know in the last few episodes we've been skipping around all throughout the race. So
Real stream of consciousness.
let's start with the first 10 laps. The start was pretty mellow. There wasn't a ton of action going on compared to other starts. But Sainz had a bad start, and that kind of led to his DNF, really, because he started on the hard tires and got just a terrible start. Went into anti-stall twice, he said in a post-race interview, which completely set him back. I think he lost 4, 5, 6 places. And then on lap 2, he was trying to make a position back up, but his hard tires just weren't heated up enough yet. So he lost grip, went into the grass and spun out, and then beached himself in the gravel.
Yep, the first of many overshoots or undershoots on turns on this course.
Yeah, I think the changes have made it much more difficult for sure. The braking zones are way more precise and way harder. So that's one big change. But moving on, Verstappen cut off Perez after their start, kind of screwed him over a little bit, because Lewis was able to kind of dive down the inside of Perez and take that position. So Lewis ended up in third place at the end of lap 1. And then Lando got a bad start, and George Russell got a pretty good start. And so Russell ended up passing Lando Norris as well. So, yep, start of the race was not too crazy, but still some interesting, spicy stuff happening. One interesting thing, when Sainz crashed, Lance Stroll pitted twice under the safety car. It wasn't immediately obvious why, but they said later that he cycled to the mediums for his first pit stop, and then cycled back to the hard tire on his second pit stop to get the 2-tire rule out of the way. So I think he was planning on going to the end on those hard tires after the second pit stop.
Essentially the opposite of Williams' plan for Albon, which for Albon ended up working and netted them points. But it's kind of the inverse of that, where they just wanted to get the tire change out of the way while they could, which was pretty smart move. That's not something a lot of other teams thought of, and I wonder if other teams had tried it, what their results might have been.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it was just that the Aston Martin's too slow to make that work, because there were so many safety cars in the race that I feel like a faster car going on that strategy would have made it work better because they would have gained positions during the safety car periods.
Yeah,
and everybody else was diving in the pits, but
yeah, maybe they were seeing Stroll so happy to defend that they thought, well, maybe he has the capability to defend for, another 55, 56 laps.
Maybe.
Get him nice and bedded in.
Yeah. So after that, Perez overtook Hamilton on lap 10 for the first time. Perez overtook Hamilton a couple times throughout the race. But it was at this point in the race, about 10, 15 laps in, that some of the drivers started complaining about their tires going off, especially the drivers that started on the mediums. It seemed like the medium tire was just really, really bad for tire wear at this track. There were several drivers throughout, like even towards the end of the race, that just completely fell off on pace because the medium tires just completely went away.
Yeah, I'm not really quite sure what was going on there with the mediums. I can't pretend to know much about tire chemistry.
Yeah, me neither. That's not my field. But anyway, Max ended up pitting on lap 19 to go on to the, I believe, hard tires. And then Perez pitted a lap later on lap 20. I think the Red Bulls were going for an undercut on the cars ahead. On lap 21, the McLarens both came in, and or it was one after the other. But then a couple laps later, Leclerc and Hamilton boxed and were able to get out ahead of the Red Bulls. So their undercut plans did not work out.
Yep.
So a little bit of a shame for Red Bull there. Perez had to re-chase Hamilton down and pass him. So on lap 23, Sebastian Vettel actually got too much on the curb and too much on the power. Spun out, hit the wall, destroyed his front wing, and that was the end of his race. He stopped on the side of the track, and a safety car came out. So yeah, poor guy. He had a rough weekend.
Yep. After 3 races, he's gotten 23 laps in overall.
Yeah, it's not been the start of the season he was hoping for. What do you think he's gonna do if things don't really change for Aston Martin?
MotoGP, probably.
Really?
I mean, we saw a little bit of his experience.
That would be quite the move.
The man can clearly handle a scooter.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got the track time now. He's got the 2 wheels experience. So, yeah, maybe Vettel to MotoGP. But
yeah. Could you imagine MotoGP at Albert Park?
That would be nuts.
Mess.
I don't think that would go very well. But yeah, so Vettel crash caused a safety car, but Perez, before the safety car came out, was able to get past Lewis Hamilton, so he retook that position, and then the safety car came out literally like 3 seconds later, so he kind of got lucky, didn't have to defend it at all.
Yep. I'm calling that safety karma. It seems he's zeroed out on that, because at the start of the season, he really struggled with the safety cars. He kind of got shafted by it last time. And this time it saved him and helped him inevitably end up with second place.
Yep. So safety car karma comes back and helps him out a little bit. And speaking of safety car karma, Russell got some good karma. He pitted out onto the safety car to come out P3, so he jumped up 2 spots for free onto the hard tires, I believe. So that was pretty good for him, but then eventually, about 10 laps later, Perez passed Russell for P2 or P3. Wait. Did Russell come out P2 or P3? Because it was Leclerc. Oh no, Verstappen was still running at this point. So he came out P3, Verstappen P2, and Leclerc P1.
It was midnight when we were watching this. I
don't
remember.
No, it was...
It's all foggy.
Yeah, it was midnight here in the United States when we were watching this. So, along with the people in England, I'm sure none of us remember everything quite clearly.
Kind of blacked out after probably about lap 41.
Yeah, honestly. But, yeah, so after Perez passed Russell on lap 36, it looked like it was going to pretty much just stay the same until, out of nowhere, Max Verstappen's engine failed on lap 39.
And now you say out of nowhere, but statistically, if you look at trends, after this race, Verstappen will now be more likely to have an engine failure than to complete a race.
That is true. If we look at statistics, then we can't really be surprised anymore about engine failures at the moment. However, this particular time, there was nothing wrong with the engine until there was.
Yes.
So, yeah, the Crafty was saying that Red Bull didn't know anything, and Max basically said he smelled some fluid, something leaking, and then 5 seconds later he was stopped on the side of the track. So kind of a weird situation for Red Bull. I don't really know what happened, if it was an oil leak or some hydraulic problem,
After
but they
the
said that.
race, it seemed that it was an external fuel sender issue on the car.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
But
Well, there you
different
go.
from the fuel issue that they had the first race.
Right, because that was a vacuum problem, and
Yep.
they seem to have solved that. So, okay, moving on to the next section of the race. Not too much happened after Verstappen went out. It wasn't too exciting towards the end, except for some cool midfield battles. But speaking of midfield battles, Lance Stroll got a 5-second penalty for weaving on the straight. He was defending from Bottas on the pit straight, and when Bottas went to make a move, Stroll completely cut him off and then did it again. And it was really sketchy, and so I agree that he needed a penalty for that.
It's very polite of you to call Aston Martin anything related to a midfield battler at this point in the season.
Well, I think the teams are a little closer than in previous seasons.
Yep. Aston Martin is, if you remember, after this race, still the only team without any points for the season.
This is true. So, I mean, obviously they have to get on top of stuff. I don't know if you can really call them back markers yet, but I mean, we were calling McLaren back markers 2 weeks or 2 races ago, and now they're, finishing 5th and 6th. So, you never know. It's early on in the season. We're only 3 races into a 23 race season, so there's so much that can happen. I'm sure a lot's going to change. But towards the end of the race, Bottas passed Stroll on lap 52. Fernando Alonso, who kind of got shafted by safety cars and just ended up with a terrible strategy. His tires went off the cliff at the end. He was on the mediums, and they got all grained up, and he dropped like 6 or 7 places in like 10 laps. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, his tires weren't the only thing that went off a cliff.
Yeah, that was not great to see for Alonso. But one of the big stories of the race was Alex Albon going super longest stint of the race. He waited until the last lap of the race to make his first pit stop for soft tires.
Yeah.
Quite the drive. That's not an easy task, but he did say that the Williams really likes that compound of tire, so I'm glad he was able to make it work.
Yeah, me too. It's cool to see Albon get points for Williams so early into his drive for them, especially off of coming out of essentially a short hiatus from Formula. I mean, he was still helping out with Red Bull, but he wasn't doing necessarily any Formula One driving for an entire year before he got into Williams.
Yeah, it's really nice to see him come back. I hope that he has a good season, because he along with Gasly kind of got the short end of the stick with Red Bull, and it was really detrimental to their careers. So it's good to see him doing well, scoring points. He scored his first point for Williams this race. So Williams is now no longer in 10th place in the Constructors' Championship. They are in 9th, which is a difference of tens of millions of dollars. So, take what you can get.
Yeah.
All right, so that was pretty much the whole race. I'll go through the finishing order, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. So the finishing order at the Australian Grand Prix was, in first place, Leclerc, second, Perez, third, Hamilton, followed by, third was Russell. What's up?
Oh, no, I was just, you swapped him.
I misspoke, sure. Yeah, sorry, my bad. First was Leclerc, second Perez, third Russell, followed by Hamilton, Norris, Ricciardo, Ocon, Bottas, Gasly, Albon, Zhou, Stroll, Schumacher, Magnussen, Tsunoda, Latifi, Alonso, Verstappen, Vettel, and Sainz. The fastest lap went to Leclerc, and the driver of the day also went to Leclerc. So
fastest laps of the day went to Leclerc. He set So many.
Yeah. He was talking for the whole race about how he wanted to pit at the end onto the soft tires to go for the fastest lap, but every time he said that, he had the fastest lap.
My dude, you already have the fastest lap.
Yeah, his engineer had to tell him, like, you've got the fastest lap, and we're pretty sure no one can beat it, so we're not going to pit you at the end, but he kept asking. So, but regardless, he got it, and his fastest lap was set on the last lap of the race, so he got what he wanted in the end, I guess. He just didn't get the soft tires. But moving on, let's talk about some general stuff that we got from this race, which the first big thing is questions and concerns revolving around Red Bull's engine. Because this is now, Max's DNF 2 of the 3 races. Sergio's DNF 1 of the 3. And all 3 DNFs were engine related.
Yep.
So, what does this mean for the future of Red Bull?
Well, it means some pretty fun, meaningless statistics for, the next couple weeks. Max Verstappen is now 100% statistically guaranteed to win any race he finishes.
This year,
Perez now has more points than Verstappen, I think, at this point.
Yep.
Right? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have to come up with some more later on.
Yeah, the interesting statistic and record that I'm following right now, or I plan to follow, is Max has finished, he's either DNF'd or finished first or second in the last, I don't know how many races, since the beginning of last season. So he's either finished first or second or not finished the race. It's pretty crazy.
Another crazy thing, Leclerc got his first Grand Slam, which I looked it up just to make sure. It's first place for qualifying, so pole position, first place for the actual race, leading every single lap, and getting fastest lap.
Yeah, I mistakenly thought that he got that in Bahrain, but he did not. This was his first Grand Slam.
Yep, the hardest one is you got to lead every single lap of the race.
Yeah, that's big because it doesn't take pit stops into account, so you basically have to get a full pit stop gap between you and the second place car before you can pit to get that criteria met, which is not an easy task.
Yeah, luckily, it didn't really seem to be a huge problem for Ferrari.
Yeah, they had a lot of pace. Leclerc had tons of pace. Sainz kind of struggled this weekend. Obviously, he had a bad qualifying. He got screwed over by a red flag. And then missed out kind of on his second lap. So his qualifying was poor. And then he was not able to make it up in the race and ended up not finishing. So Sainz had a rough weekend, but the good news for Ferrari is that it still looks like their car is far and away the best on the grid.
Yep. Yeah, now Sainz just needs to get some pace to keep up with his teammate.
Yeah, I really want to see them duke it out this year because I really think Sainz is really good and underrated.
Yeah, he scored higher than Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship last year, so we have no reason to believe that he can't be competing with Leclerc for Drivers' Championship this year.
Yeah. But speaking of fast cars, McLaren has come back in a major way. I don't know if this is a permanent thing, but it seems that they have figured out at least part of what their problem was. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Whatever that was.
Yeah, I don't know if it was really because they were having problems with their brakes in Bahrain. I don't know if that was just really that much of an issue or what the deal was. In the post-race interviews, Lando is still pretty negative about the way things are going, and he says that the car's still not where he needs it to be, and they've still got a lot of work to do. Daniel Ricciardo's a little more positive and taking positives from this race, which I think is kind of the way everybody needs to go. But I'm just glad McLaren isn't, because we were thinking that after the first race, is McLaren the worst car?
Yeah, we went into emergency mode there. We're like, oh no, McLaren's a back marker. This is terrible.
Yeah, McLaren is the new Haas. What's going on? But thank goodness that doesn't seem to be the case as much anymore. So
Yeah.
hopefully they can bounce back and continue this good run. They finished 5th and 6th this race.
They're a little upside down, but it seems all it took was a trip to Australia to get them right side up again.
There you go. Exactly.
It was such low-hanging fruit for a joke, I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's there. I expect it. But yeah, Albon scored his first point for Williams, so that's good for them. Really good for the Constructors' Championship, because who knows if Aston Martin will even score a point this year. But
there's only one way to find out.
Right. Watch more races. But so that was good for Williams, but I am concerned about Nicholas Latifi and his abilities in the car, because he has been terrible this season.
Yeah,
he's crashing
especially
all
next
the time.
to Alex Albon, who, as we discussed, scored his first points in Williams after his third race with the team.
Yeah, after a year out, like I've always thought Albon was a really good driver. So he comes in and he's, easily beating Latifi. But it's just crazy the amount of times that Latifi is crashing and destroying his car. Like, Williams and Aston Martin have probably the highest repair bills of everybody so far this year. Maybe Haas too, but it's just like he needs to stop putting them in the wall because they can't afford that.
Yeah, we're in cost cap era. You can't afford that anymore.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that for his sake that he steps it up and kind of gets a handle on the car in the future, because he's not really guaranteed in that team anymore like he was when the Williams family still owned it. Because he's a paid driver, so he brings a lot of money to the team, but Doralton Ventures they don't need the money like the Williams family did. Yeah. So Latifi's really just fighting for his spot on merit this year, and if things don't change soon, I don't see him having a seat next year.
If we were to dive into speculation land, who do you think Latifi will be replaced by next season?
I think that depends on if Sebastian Vettel retires, but Oscar Piastri is almost assuredly going to be in F1 next season.
That's the hope.
He was the F2 champion last year. And then it will be interesting to see maybe another F2 driver. There's a couple of really talented, like Dennis Hauger is one that comes to mind. There's some really talented people in F2 right now that could easily slot into a spot like in Aston Martin or Williams. But I think Piastri has the first ticket. Like, if you listen to the interviews with him and all of the other drivers, all the F1 drivers are saying, yeah, you'll be on the grid next year. We'll see you. We'll race you next year. Like, all that stuff. So It seems pretty obvious to me that his ticket's pretty well punched. He just kind of got unlucky with how the musical chairs of the silly season played out last year.
Yeah. Do you think Aston Martin would choose him over the reserve driver, Hülkenberg?
It's hard to say. I love Hülkenberg, but I don't think he can come back. I think there's too much talent in F2, and he's had his shot. He was in F1 for like 10 years, so.
Yeah.
So as much as I love the guy and want to see him do well and want to see him score a podium, I don't think he's going to come back full time, but I could be very wrong, and that's what's fun about the silly season. They have surprised us with other things like that.
We've been very wrong for the past couple months, so
exactly.
There's always room for us to misinterpret things.
Yep. But speaking of us being wrong, Mercedes, well, I guess we weren't really wrong, but Mercedes found pace this weekend, and they were a lot closer to Red Bull, I'd say, than in previous weeks.
Yep. Yeah, do you think that's due to mechanical changes, or do you think that's drivers finding more pace with how they drive the car, specifically?
I think it's actually the drivers finding more pace. I don't know how many mechanical changes have really been introduced into the Mercedes. I'm sure a couple, but I think they're figuring out how to set the car up, because they aren't porpoising like bouncing around on the straights nearly as much as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that the interesting thing about that is it seems it's different for every car and for every track, depending on the setup. Because Ferrari never really had problems with porpoising, or not like Mercedes did. But Ferrari looks like they were about to like catch air with
Yeah.
how much they were bouncing down the straights.
Yeah, it almost seems like for Ferrari, the porpoising is more a measure of how fast they're going, whereas for other teams, it seems to be more of a struggle with aerodynamics.
Right. It's almost like it's an inevitability depending on, how fast you end up going. But it only really happened on the two straights. So, it was only a couple seconds each lap at the end of the long straights, but still, it couldn't have been very comfortable
No.
sitting in a car that's super static and bouncing like that. So, really good job to the Ferrari drivers for, dealing with that and driving as well, at least Leclerc did.
Yep. But Ferrari, or Mercedes rather, was looking pretty good. Especially Russell. He's been surprisingly good this entire season. He's been right there with Hamilton, and I think that's partially due to the cars being a little bit worse. It kind of brings them down to an even plane. But I think it's also just Russell being pretty fast in these cars.
Yeah, Russell has definitely been doing very well this season in comparison to Lewis Hamilton. Russell is in second place in the Drivers' Championship, whereas Hamilton is down in fifth. So, yeah, he's been killing it. I would love to see Russell beat Hamilton this year.
That would be quite the upset.
Yeah, that would shock a lot of people and make quite the statement. And it'd be interesting to see how Hamilton would take that and what he would do.
A Leclerc, Russell, Perez, WDC.
Yeah.
That would be chaos.
Maybe. That would be. But speaking of which, let's move on and talk about where the standings lie after the Australian Grand Prix. So in first place is Ferrari, second Mercedes, third Red Bull, fourth McLaren, fifth Alpine, sixth Alfa Romeo, seventh Haas, 8th AlphaTauri, 9th Williams, and 10th Aston Martin. So Mercedes moves up, or no, they stay the same. They were in second. They actually extend their lead on Red Bull and cut Ferrari's lead. Mercedes scored more points than any other constructor this week, which kind of is surprising considering how the race went.
Consistency is key.
Yep, exactly. Third and fourth is better than one person getting first. So, yeah, McLaren's up into fourth, passing Alpine. So that was their big jump. They were in ninth, I think. Well, no, they weren't. They were in seventh or eighth. But yeah, still a pretty big jump for them, which is good to see. It'd be nice to see a McLaren Alpine fight this year. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
So moving on to the driver's standings. First we have Leclerc, then Russell, Sainz, Perez, Hamilton, Verstappen, Ocon, Norris, Magnussen, Bottas, Ricciardo, Gasly, Tsunoda, Alonso, Zhou, Albon, Schumacher, Stroll, Hülkenberg, and Latifi. So, notably, Sebastian Vettel is still not in the official standings because he has not officially completed a race.
Very impressive.
Yeah, so we're now 3 races in, and Seb still isn't on the board at all, which is too bad. But hopefully he can break that trend in a couple weeks.
Yep.
It's interesting. Verstappen in 6th. Behind Hamilton and Perez. That's, not really surprising considering he's DNF'd twice in the first 3 races, but...
Yeah, it's almost more of a testament to how high he is, having only completed 1 race this season.
Which was a win, yep.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's quite the interesting standings we got right now. It'll, I'm sure, settle down a little bit more as the season goes on, but
especially
not what we were expecting.
Versus Latifi.
Hulkenberg will probably stay the same, honestly.
In the standings.
Yep.
I wonder how long that'll stand.
Yeah, we'll see. But let's move on to our segments. First off, we've got the overtake of the week. This week, I gave it to an IndyCar overtake, as opposed to last week. I gave it to Alexander Rossi for his overtake on Felix Rosenqvist at Long Beach. He absolutely sent it from way back down the inside into turn one. Rosenqvist turned into Rossi because he wasn't expecting him to really send it from that far back, but he did, and it stuck, and no penalties were assigned, so it counts. But yeah, quite that was pretty cool. That was really the biggest overtake I saw this week of everybody. But Marc Marquez also had some contenders in his race because he sent it down the inside on his MotoGP bike as well. So moving on to my favorite segment, the Pit Stop Championship. This week we had another battle between Red Bull and McLaren. Red Bull came out on top. The top 10 pit stops and the point scorers were Perez, Norris, Hamilton, Latifi, Leclerc, Ricciardo, Stroll, Verstappen, Zhou, and Alonso. The fastest by Perez was 17.434 seconds. And the slowest point scoring one was by Alonso at 18.394 seconds. I'm just getting my calculator out so I can tell you the spread real quick. That is a spread of almost a full second, 0.96 seconds. So quite a difference between first and 10th.
Yeah, it seemed the broadcaster is getting a bit better at putting up the times for the actual time the car was stopped as well.
Yeah, they still have stuff to work on though. There were some weird moments with the broadcast during the race. We had some moments where we only got like 1 or 2 frames of a picture before we moved on to the next shot. And then we had some other ones that were just still pictures that stayed on the screen for like 5 to 10 seconds.
It's an artistic choice.
So, yeah, I think Sky Sports has some stuff to get on top of with their graphics and their race direction, but it wasn't too bad. We're definitely seeing more of the fights than we used to in the past, in the midfield especially. They have done a better job at selecting which shots they take. It's just putting them together that seems to be the struggle right now.
Yep.
So hopefully they can get on top of that. But we will move on to our race predictions for the Australian Grand Prix last week or 2 weeks ago that we made. So I will start. I predicted first Leclerc, second Verstappen, third Sainz, fourth Ocon, fifth Alonso, and my dark horse was Perez.
Yeah, so I had Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, Russell, with my dark horse as Ricciardo.
So neither of us did too well.
No, that was really bad. You got first place, but Verstappen didn't finish. Sainz didn't finish.
Yeah.
Perez ended up getting second.
Yeah. To remind everybody, the first 5 were Leclerc, Perez, Russell, Hamilton, Norris.
Yeah.
So we were quite a bit off, but I don't think we could have really predicted Verstappen and Sainz DNFing.
Which I almost prefer.
Yeah.
It's much more exciting when our predictions are completely wrong.
Exactly. But yeah, no, Ocon and Alonso I had way up there, but they did not do well this week. Alonso had a rough race. I think Ocon scored.
Ocon was in the points, right?
He got 7th, yes. So he did okay, but Alonso especially had a kind of a brutal race. But for my fastest lap prediction, I said Sainz, and that absolutely did not happen.
He definitely had the fastest race, though. Came out to under 5 minutes.
Yes, fastest race. If I had that as my prediction, I would have nailed it.
There you go.
But
new idea quite for a segment right there.
Fastest, shortest race. That's a good idea. Shortest race championship.
Yeah, the DQ championships.
Yeah. So what'd you have for your fastest lap?
I had Leclerc.
Well, there you go.
A rare
Point for
win
you.
for the Ben team.
There you go. Nailed it.
Driver of the day, we were both wrong.
Driver of the day, we both said Daniel Ricciardo, and I don't think he was even in the top 3.
Nope, which I honestly really expected that to not be the case, but okay, that's fair enough.
His home race, and there was a record attendance at the Australian Grand Prix. But no, he did not win driver of the day. It was given to Leclerc. So Leclerc just with the clean sweep, grand slam.
Yeah, bad internet in Australia, I guess.
What's that?
Bad internet in Australia. They just couldn't get on to vote.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're both wrong on that one.
Yep.
So let's talk about the next race. The Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix is set to take place in Imola, Italy on April 24th.
Hold on, I need to look up the full name for this race really quick.
Oh, yeah, you do that for sure. I just shortened it because I wasn't about to try.
What's it called?
But while you're doing that, this will be the 3rd race back at this legendary track since it took a long sabbatical. And I'm very interested to see how these Grand Effect cars handle this brutal track. There's a ton of bumps, hills, high-speed turns that can really take a toll on the cars and the drivers alike.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, what is the full official name of the Grand Prix?
The next race will be in Italy at the Formula One Pirelli Gran Premio del Made in Italy e dell'Emilia Romagna 2022. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that.
I think that's about as well as anybody who doesn't speak Italian can do. But
yeah,
yeah, no, that this race is kind of known for having an extraordinarily long name. Kind of like IndyCar races. I feel like IndyCar races, with all their sponsorships, have really long names too.
Yep.
But so let's talk about what we think's gonna happen at this bumpy, long, fast track. So top 5. You went first last time, so I will go first this time. My top 5, I am going to say, Sainz, Verstappen, Perez, Russell, Hamilton, and then dark horse Norris.
Are you predicting a Leclerc DNF?
Leclerc DNF.
Oh my god, you sadist.
Yep, something like that.
Well, I'm going to predict the opposite. I predict that Leclerc is going to drain the life force of the Tifosi once they're in Italy. Set the fastest lap in history at this track for first place. We'll have Sainz afterwards. He gets some of the backdraft off of that, and Leclerc gives him a tow to second. And then I think I'll have Russell after that. And then, let's see, that's 3 places. In 4th place, I'm going to put Perez. And in 5th place, I will put Norris. I think Verstappen will fail to finish this race again. As we mentioned, the statistics just really suggest it at this point. And my dark horse, Bottas.
Bottas. Interesting. I like it. I like it a lot. Bottas has been doing really well.
I can't be predictable anymore. It's hurt me too often in the past.
Yeah, it's kind of you kind of just gotta shoot for the moon and hope it hits it.
Yep.
But so that's our top 5. Let's go to fastest lap. I'm gonna say Verstappen.
Again, I think Leclerc is gonna use Tifosi Life Force to punch a hole in the air and get fastest lap.
Okay. Do you think Leclerc is on for his 2nd Grand Slam?
No.
No. Not quite. All right. So driver of the day, who do we think it's going to be? I will say Lando Norris.
Any explanation?
I think he'll have a bad qualifying and a good race.
Okay. I am going with Leclerc because it's Italy. He's a young, good-looking guy, and he races for Ferrari.
Sounds like somebody's on the hype train a little bit, but, you know.
I'm just using the statistics, like I said.
Okay, that's fair. You really like those statistics. I don't know how well that's going to treat you, though, in the long run.
Statistics never lie. This is what I've learned during my life.
Yes, but do you have enough of a data pool? There's only 3 races so far.
I mean, it's just really strong data.
Well, you know, I can't argue with that. All right.
If anybody who listens to this is actually a mathematics major statistician, I promise I'm joking. I promise I've taken math before.
Yes. So far every finish is statistically significant, right? That's how that works.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all we've got for today. So, do you have anything you want to add before we sign out, Ben?
No. Follow RevHang on Instagram and all the other social media if you want to see more statistics. And follow OIT Racing if you want to see more student-built race cars.
Yes. To kind of piggyback off of that, I have a very exciting announcement to make, which is that we now have a website, which is full of the current standings and a lot of the series we cover. I am trying my best to add more every day, but there's a lot of things going on in the world of racing right now. So go check that out. I'm really happy with how it's looking right now. So I would be really, really, really happy if you went and took a look at it. But with all that being said, thank you everybody so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of RevHangout, leave a like or rating on the platform you listened on. It really helps us out. If you'd like to follow our daily thoughts and opinions on all things motorsports, like Ben said, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at RevHangMedia. Like I said before, our website is out. It is called RevHang.com. We've got a bunch of tables with all of the different F1 standings, as well as IndyCar and MotoGP, with more to come soon. So definitely go check that out. And we will be back in another 2 weeks after the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Italy. But until then, I have been Nathan.
And I have been Ben, not the Indy 500 miles, Bagley.
Thanks for hanging out with us, guys.
Catch you in the next one. This is Ben from the future. It is 500 miles. I was right. Nathan was wrong. Thank you.
And this is Nathan from the future. I don't even really know what's up or down anymore. It's been such a crazy week in racing. So I'm just going to read this off of motorsport.com for clarification. The Indy 500 covers a total of 500 miles, hence the 500 part of the name. The drivers cover that distance by doing 200 laps of the 2.5-mile Indianapolis Motor Speedway oval circuit layout. Thanks for listening.